מינותה שירביצני על מי מנוחות, על מי מנוחות ינעלני. נפשי ישובב, ישובב, ינחני ומגלי צדק, ינחני ומגלי צדק, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך, המה המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני, לפני, שולחן נגד צוררי. נשענת ושמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. אדוני רואי לא אחסר, אדוני רואי לא אחסר. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters, restores my soul. God guides me in straight paths, for that is God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you, God, are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. After hearing of Walter's passing, I learned the following parable, which appears in the Babylonian Talmud in Masechet Ta'anit, in the Tractate of Ta'anit. It's a parable told by Rabbi Yitzchak, who says that a man was once wandering in the desert, hungry, thirsty, exhausted with the heat, and chanced to find a tree. The tree's fruit was sweet, shadow was pleasant, and it had a brook flowing at its base. And so he ate the fruit, he drank the water, and he rested in the shade. And when it was time for him to continue his journey, he said to the tree, "O tree, how can I bless you? If I were to say, may your fruit be sweet, see, it's already sweet. Were I to say, may your shade be pleasant, it's already pleasant. And were I to say, may there be a brook at your feet, the brook is already there. And so, said Rabbi Yitzchak, my blessing will therefore be, may all of your saplings be like you. Francis and Jerry, Steve, Rena, Marcia, Warren, Ruth, Sam, Judith and Aaron, Max, Ilana, Michael, Michelle, Adam, Jordan, and Isaiah. You were Walter's saplings. He loved you. He was proud of you. You are his immortality, his blessing. Though you, his children, 7 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren were most important among the saplings that Walter, Judge Wertheim, Opa, that he planted in his lifetime, you were not the only of his legacies that will continue to grow. We'll hear soon from Walter's children and grandchildren about a storied history, loving relationships, and important moments of recognition in his life. However, you should also know something that has never happened to me before. When I informed our executive board at a meeting earlier this week that Walter's passing was imminent, tears immediately began to flow in the room. Walter was a member of what is now Congregation Shari Tikva for 55 years. He was the author of the merger document between the Mayfield Temple and the Hillcrest Temple that created our synagogue in 1970. As a survivor, Walter was dedicated to speaking, volunteering, and financially supporting our face-to-face Holocaust education program. As a cornerstone of our community, those of us here today from Shari Tikva not only love you and support you in your mourning and loss, but also join you in your mourning and loss. We read in the book of Jeremiah, Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach B'Adonai, V'Haya Adonai Miftacho. Blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord alone. This person shall be like a tree planted by waters, sending forth its roots by a stream. May the roots planted by Judge Walter Reinhold Wertheim, Yehuda Menachem ben Eliezer Ufredel, continue to grow far and deep. May we be blessed to continue seeing them shoot forth from the earth, wherever and whenever we look. It's my honor now to call upon Erev Rav, Jerry Ginsburg, more importantly today, Walter's son-in-law, to offer a psalm.
Shir Lama'alot, Esa Einai El Heharim, Me'ayan Yavo Ezri, Ezri Me'im Adonai, Oseh Shamayim Va'aretz, Ayitin Lamot Raglecha, Ayanum Shomrecha, Hine Lo Yanum Velo Yishan Shomer Yisrael, Adonai Shomrecha, Adonai Silcha Al Yad Yeminecha, Yamam Hashemesh Lo Yikaka V'Reach Balayla, Adonai Yishmarecha Mikora, Yishmor et Nafshecha, Adonai Yishmar Tzedcha Uvoecha Me'atav Yarolam. A song of ascents. I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where will my help come from? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm and guard your life. Adonai guards your going and coming from this time forth and forevermore. Amen.
We'll hear now from Walter's children, first from Francis, Marcia, and then Steve.
Okay. This is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Not only because I'm so sad to have lost my father, but because I have the task of summarizing his 93 years of life, a story that is so compelling that we could be here well into Shabbos. Walter Wertheim was born in 1925 in a town called München-Glachbad in Germany. His parents had an older son who died before my father's birth. I don't know a lot about those early years, except that they were relatively happy. He was the very indulged only grandchild on his mother's side, and his Uncle Leo was in the toy business. Unfortunately, the atmosphere in Germany for Jews was deteriorating around him. His mother died when he was 12, leaving only him and his father, a bond the two would share until my grandfather's death. On November 9th, 1938, he was a witness to Kristallnacht, a horror that resulted in destruction of many synagogues and Jewish businesses. He was told the next day he could no longer go to his public school. In 1939, his bereft father sent him to England on what was then known as the Kindertransport. 90% of these children never saw their parents again. My grandfather Louis, however, was able to get to New York and spent the next year frantically trying to bring my father over from England. They settled in Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan, a neighborhood of Yekas, German refugees. As my father told me, Louis wanted to enroll Walter in high school and had a feeling he would be asked certain placement questions. So Louis walked my father to the park and started coaching him. Sure enough, Walter was asked about the same topics for some lucky reason and was skipped ahead and graduated from an American high school at the age of 16. The war was on and he took a job sweeping in a factory, kind of waiting to be drafted. Meanwhile, Louis had resumed business as a scrap dealer. He did business with the Younger brothers, who had established a children's clothing factory. The oldest, Max, had a daughter, Ruth, who was 2 years younger than Walter. Walter was drafted at 18 and became a citizen after 90 days. He was wounded in Okinawa. It's interesting, they sent the Jewish soldiers to Japan. They were afraid they were going to be German spies if they sent them to Europe. Upon his recovery in the Philippines, he was set to fight in the invasion of Japan, which didn't happen because the war ended after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like the rest of his generation, he went to college on the GI Bill, and after only 2.5 years, he went to Brooklyn Law School. He married Ruth, his first love, in 1950 at the Hebrew Tabernacle in Washington Heights. Ruth's family had moved the factory to West Virginia in the late 1940s. My parents both had very dislocated lives and were eager to start a family. As my father said, my mother wanted to become a matriarch, and she certainly did. They had me in 1952, and they soon realized that the glut of lawyers in New York meant it was hard to make a living, so they moved to West Virginia where Walter became office manager for Younger Manufacturing. They had Steve and then Marcia in West Virginia. We lived in the town of Vienna, and my dad worked very long hours for my grandfather, whom he loved dearly, but who certainly was not an easy person to work for. However, he credited his father-in-law Max with instilling his lifelong love of Judaism. Tragedy struck in 1961 when his Ruthie died of cancer. In addition, Max told him the business was likely going to fail. In 1962, he left his 3 young children with his in-laws and moved to Cleveland, where he became a lawyer for the Small Business Administration, and where he hoped to find a nice Jewish girl to raise his beloved children. In those days, there was no J-date, but there was something much better, which I call Yenternet. My grandmother in West Virginia wrote her sister-in-law in Cincinnati, my cousin Barbie's mother, Jeanette. Jeanette, in turn, wrote her cousin Frances in Cleveland, who set to work. My father described going out to dinner every night with a different woman, spreading our pictures on the table, and being very upfront about his family. The very nice lady who fell for him first, this very handsome man, was very happy to become his wife, but said she was going to send us to boarding school. She was quickly out of the running. Walter had moved to Cleveland in July, and he struck gold by August. He met Jane, an art and music librarian who was also very upfront about her hearing impairment. Walter thought this remarkable woman was anything but impaired, and they were engaged in September, much to the horror of her mother, Elsie, who was furious that Frances had set Jane up with a man with 3 children. The roads were terrible then, and Jane didn't even meet us until Thanksgiving a couple of months later, when our charm and best behavior won over both women. Elsie became a beaming grandmother when the couple was married in January 1963. We moved to Cleveland, and it was a tough adjustment, but we formed this family. Dad used to say that Jane saved us. She did, but I'd like to think that we also gave her life meaning. My parents settled in as a typical suburban family, though we were stunned to have landed in an alien place where the school was packed with other Jewish kids. We grew up in West Virginia. My parents made the rounds of activities, the most important being, actually more for my father than for Jane, frankly, enrolling us in Hebrew school. We joined the German synagogue on Mayfield Road in the fall of 1963, and as the rabbi said, he never left in 55 years through all its moves and changes. He also did the usual schlepping, though some things were not his thing, most notably sports. He was an exercise aficionado well before it was fashionable, and I remember coming downstairs before school to see him in the living room doing his Royal Canadian Air Force fitness routine. No videos, just a pamphlet guided him. Team sports, however, were a mystery. My brother finally got a big play in a Little League game and looked over to find my father on the sidelines reading the New York Times, having missed the whole thing. Oh well, his intellectualism was really a very large part of his legacy. My grandfather Louis was still in New York and began having health issues, and my father insisted he move to Cleveland. After a short time with us, he moved into the old Alcazar Hotel, which at that time was mostly for long-term stays. My father stopped by to see his father every single day on his way home from work. Again, the role model of devotion. He was very proud of his children as they started to leave the nest, and he also moved on his career, taking a job as a lawyer for the Defense Contract Administration, the only agency really hiring at his level at the height of the Vietnam War. He was very conflicted, but he needed to support his family. I married Jerry right out of college, and as we each found our mates, Warren and then Rena, my father truly felt that he was a father of 6. Finally, on November 8th, 1983, just the day before the 45th anniversary of Kristallnacht, my daughter Ruth was born. After all he had gone through, he felt her birth was a form of redemption, that the Nazis had truly lost, and Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel lives. 6 more grandchildren followed in the next 7 years, and a true era of joy was at hand, including finally getting his dream job, a judgeship at the age of 63. This great time lasted until his beloved Jane developed Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to fast forward to 2006. Our daughter Ruth was in Israel for a year, and her Opa wanted to visit her. We convinced him to go with Jerry and me. His knowledge base was on full display, pointing out the historical details at every turn. If you know how, if you've been to Israel, all the street names have like great, heroes' names to them. My father knew who everyone was. He knew who they were married to, how many kids it was really impressive. After a tour of the Supreme Court building in Jerusalem, the young guide explained the origin of Israeli civil law. Afterwards, my dad turned to us and said, "Look here." The expression he would always use when he knew it was time to listen up. "I didn't want to embarrass her," he said, "but she got it all wrong." We didn't bother to do anything but listen. I could always assume that when it came to history and civics, he would always be right. He always was. The last leg of that trip involved a stopover in Germany, where we made our way back to Mönchengladbach, arriving on the train to the exact station he had left from more than 65 years before. We went to one of the old Jewish cemeteries and saw the graves of his grandparents, mother and brother, and many other relatives. The local head of the Jewish community who had led us into the walled ceremony scribbled rapidly, taking down notes, as Dad also identified so many other names, which a lot of people, nobody else in the town really could identify for them on the gravestones, even though he had left when he was only 14 years old. It was a difficult visit, but an unforgettable gift to us. In his later years, he made Holocaust education his mission, and his legacy lives on in all of us. I will stop here. I went on for a while, I know, but my siblings and others need to take their turns too.
Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. A most notable start to the Torah portion, Shoftim. Justice, justice shalt thou pursue. We are given instructions for establishing a system of leadership rules to treat persons fairly. On this list are judges, kings, priests, and prophets to ensure fairness, leadership, and to uphold the values and standards of society. My father always proudly stated that he was appointed to the position of administrative law judge for the Social Security Administration the week of this reading in 1998. As most of you may know, I am Walter's youngest child, Marcia. Wait, let me correct that. Second youngest. My parents truly had 6 children. I always said, if you lined us up, you cannot tell the outlaws from the in-laws. Before my 50th birthday, I asked my dad how he felt about his youngest child reaching this milestone. He replied, "My youngest turns 50 in 6 months. That would be my sister-in-law, Rena." In true judicial fashion, he loved each of us equally and fairly. We learned early on in our lives that family units are defined by relationships and not by your biological relatives, and family was my father's top priority. When my mother Ruth died, my father married my mother Jane within a year and a half. He was most concerned with us being together as a family again. He worked for the government his whole career, which allowed him to be home for dinner every night. We would eat dinner, rather quickly I might add, but we would sit around the dinner table for what seemed like an hour or two discussing the events, both current and historic. Sometimes these discussions became heated and were reined in with my father pointing his index finger. "Now look here." Point taken, Dad. It was rather convenient that our father was a living and breathing history book with an incredible capacity to retain facts. He would read the New York Times cover to cover throughout his life. I clearly remember studying for a test in my 9th grade physics class at Wiley Junior High School. We had to memorize the president's cabinet members. I asked my dad to quiz me. He said, "The teacher has it all wrong," and pointed out all the recent changes, who was in this position, who was in that position, and he was going to call her and correct her. And some of you who are here who may have gone to Wiley may know who that teacher was. My father participated in very few outside activities. However, the center of his life, as you have heard, was his involvement in the synagogue Sha'ari Tikva, where he was a member for 55 years. He served in every position, including treasurer, head of men's club, and even once filled in as president for a few days. Every Sunday while I was in Hebrew school, he would spend his time in the office writing checks and balancing the books. In true judicial fashion, he exhibited leadership and strong values, which influenced me to become an accountant and served for over 20 years on the boards at every synagogue we have ever belonged to. My father and Mother Jane were married for 49 years, the last decade of which he nursed my mother through Alzheimer's, becoming a widower again in 2012. For 7 years, he sat daily by my mother's side at Menorah Park, lovingly caring for her, feeding her, and being present. He truly felt it was his turn to care for her as she cared for us from the first day we met her. On the day she died, the aides at Menorah Park were sobbing and told me they hoped they would find a love like him in their lives someday. My father considered himself very lucky to have found love 3 times in his life. In these later years, my father and Lottie Cohn were so fortunate to have each other's company. Whenever I thanked Lottie for being such a special part of my father's life, she would respond, "You know, he is a special part of my life, too." Judge Walter R. Wertheim was the most just and fair person I have known, a man who guided us with wisdom, calmness, and strength. He was a person who had every reason to see the world as unfair, but instead guided us to always think calmly and see the best in each person and situation. Throughout his life, I have never seen my father bitter or angry. Instead, he approached each hurdle in life with his quiet strength. In fact, he did not consider himself a Holocaust survivor, as he was never in the camps, but he truly survived. I was supposed to visit my father this weekend, arriving today. I last spoke with my father on Sunday evening. We were looking forward to the visit and spending time together. We ended our phone call the same way we did every time we spoke. He said, "Bye-bye, Marcia. I love you." "Bye-bye, Dad. I love you."
Oftentimes, we talk about somebody's past and the things they've done, and we're usually talking about 10, 20, sometimes 30 years ago. But 3 special moments took place in my dad's life this past year. Last winter, the Cleveland Museum of Art put on an exhibition of German expressionists, including Ludwig Meidner, a Jewish painter who taught art in my father's class at a Jewish day school in Cologne. My dad was there because he could no longer go to his public school, as you've heard earlier, in his hometown after Kristallnacht. Meidner was teaching teens because the Nazis banned and burned expressionist art, and it was a way to make a living. We fast forward to 2018, and the exhibition included this Jewish painter, Meidner. My dad, though finding it hard to walk, insisted on going. My sister Marcia was actually in town, and she and I went with my dad to the museum. To our disappointment, Meidner was not included in the exhibition. The following Monday, I called the curator and very surprisingly got a quick call back and asked, what happened to the missing art? She laughed, not in a bad way, and explained weather had hindered them from finishing the setup. She was new to Cleveland and she thought no one would notice. But she said she had been warned that she was to learn never to underestimate Cleveland art lovers. She said that Meidner was now up and invited my father to a lecture in the gallery. While driving there to my dad to this lecture, he said, I didn't prepare a speech. And I said, Dad, we're there to hear the lecturer. You're not supposed to speak. I've been wrong about him a lot in my life. We were late to the lecture, and when we walked in, the curator said, you must be Mr. Wertheim. Would you like to tell us about Ludwig Meidner, whom you knew personally? He proceeded to tell the story how the artist invited him to his studio and to draw his portrait. Now, before you think, oh, how wonderful, whatever, the artist was broke. He was trying to get my dad to get my grandfather to pay for this. My dad didn't, as my dad said, no thank you. People were very interested in why he was in Cologne, about the artist, and they wanted him to continue. He then explained to a rapt audience the story of Kristallnacht, his experience on the children's transport, and artistic censorship in Nazi Germany. The second event that happened, the movie G.I. Jews, many of you know, was playing at the Cleveland International Film Festival at the Cedar Lee Theater. It was about the experience of American Jewish soldiers in World War II. I took my father to see it. This was not an easy thing to do. I was able to park in a temporarily disabled spot for a few minutes outside the theater. The crowd was large, but parted for him and clapped as they found out that he too was a GI Jew. We sat down and a reporter came over and asked to interview my dad. After he was done, I asked him, are you interviewing other GI Jews? He said no, as he was the only one in this crowded theater. Part of the movie dealt with anti-Semitism faced by Jewish GIs. On the way home, my dad told me a story I had never heard before about an incident that occurred during his service. He was called a dirty kike by fellow soldiers and thrown in the shower with his clothes on. Other Jews in his company told him not to cause trouble and just let it go. But my father told me he had not come to this country to put up with this kind of abuse. He reported it to the company commander, who brought all the troops together, and the commander said he would not abide by anti-Semitic behavior, and the taunting stopped. The following day, ironically, was Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Dad was one of 6 survivors called on to represent the 6 million in the community commemoration. I spoke on his behalf. My final words were, as we know, this generation of liberators and survivors are sadly disappearing from our midst. Therefore, I am pleased tonight to be here tonight with you on this solemn occasion to honor my father, Judge Walter Reinhold Wertheim. Little did I know that the next time I would be honoring our father would be at his funeral. Thank you.
We'll now hear from two of Walter's 7 grandchildren, Ruth and then Ilana.
Hello. I am Ruthie, Walter's oldest grandchild, and the one that made him an Opa. It was incredibly difficult for me to decide which events or anecdotes to share to truly capture the essence of the greatest person I have ever known. It is impossible to put into words how amazing Opa was. Every time I visited Opa, we looked at his pictures. We did this dozens and dozens of times, and every time I learned something new and heard a new story. This is a testament to his incredible life, and that he was always thinking about his life in a new way. One of the most memorable finds was his visa out of Germany. The timestamp was 3 days. He had 3 days to leave, and he told me how lucky he felt to have been able to leave. Just yesterday, I found the letters he wrote to his father while he was on the kinder transport in England, while he waited to come to the U.S. I cannot imagine what it was like for him as a 14-year-old by himself in a country where he did not speak the language, did not know anyone at all, and did not know when and if he would see his father again. For a man who had been through so much in his life, he had such gratitude and appreciation for everything. Family and being together is the core of our family. Opa could trace his family tree back to when people first received last names. Not only could he tell you how they were related to us, he had a story about each person. Every time I saw Opa, he had something new he wanted to share with me. Through Opa, I understood everyone has a story, and all of them are important, which is one of the main reasons I became a speech pathologist. Part of the reason that this is so difficult is because there were so many sides to Opa. He always dressed in slacks, a button-down shirt, a sport coat, and a bow tie. On a casual day, he wore a button-down shirt and a sweater. But don't be fooled, Opa was a fun guy. I have a video of Grandma Jane and Opa surrounded by all their grandchildren as we cheer, "Go Grandma, go Grandpa," as they rocked out on the dance floor at my bat mitzvah. We were looking at pictures of Opa just yesterday. He was an 18-year-old posing on the beach, showing off his physique in a bathing suit with "No explanation needed" written on the back of the picture in his handwriting. There was also a picture of my Grandma Ruth from around the same time, lying on a beach in a bathing suit. Opa said she sent the picture to make sure he came home. I cannot imagine a world without my Opa in it. Opa shaped me to be the person that I am today. To say family was everything to Opa would be an understatement. Being able to laugh with each other is good in good times, as well as support and comfort each other during this extremely difficult time, is Opa's legacy.
Brilliant, humble, strong, curious, loyal, sincere, generous, proud, fair, loving, open-minded, respectful, courageous, and resilient. These are just some of the words that first came to mind when my siblings and I recounted our memories of Opa. Growing up, we learned so much from him, but not because he would sit and lecture us. Opa led by example through his commitment to his faith, family, and education. Being Jewish was very important to Opa, and the synagogue played a central role in his life. Every major life event that I can remember centered around the shul. For his birthdays, he was happiest celebrating with his family and community on Shabbat morning. To this day, in my mind, Cleveland only has two places to visit: Opa's synagogue and Uncle Stevie's house. Opa has always instilled in us the importance of family and being there for each other. For as long as he could travel, he was there for us for every major life event. But it was the time spent with Opa away from the craziness of the major life events that stand out. When my siblings and I were younger, living in Chicago, I remember how excited my mom was to tell us that Grandma and Opa were moving to Milwaukee. We had never lived near any of our grandparents, and now they'd only be a short drive away. We would visit Opa and Grandma a lot, and we loved it. I will never forget their apartment, which was across the street from Lake Michigan. Some of our most special memories are when Opa would take us to fly kites at the park by the lake. As we got older, we came to appreciate the individual time we spent with Opa even more. Our visits transitioned from playing games on the floor to sitting with him while he showed us photos and shared old family stories. He was always interested in hearing about what we were doing and was able to draw on his personal experiences to make meaningful connections with us. We never walked away from a conversation with Opa without learning something new. Last year I went to visit Opa with my husband Michael and our daughter, Opa's great-granddaughter Jordan. For the first time since I was young, this visit was not all about photos and stories. He happily returned to his playful ways, reading to Jordan and making her laugh with his silly faces. He couldn't have been prouder to introduce everyone to his great-granddaughter. We wish Opa could have met his great-grandson Isaiah in person, but I take comfort in that he saw him via FaceTime. Opa, Jordan, and Isaiah want you to know how much they love the Hanukkah gifts that you sent him last week. Opa has always been the smartest person that I know. This was evident when we found out that Opa got a higher score on the New York State English exam than my sister Michelle. And English was not his first language. Opa's commitment to education extended well beyond his school years. He made it a priority to attend each of his grandchildren's high school and college graduations. Whenever we visited, he told me about all the classes and lectures that he attended. Through his example, we learned you can never be too old to learn something new. Talking to him was like talking to a live history book. This was especially true when he would talk about his experience leaving Germany during the Holocaust. When I was in 8th grade, we were learning about World War II in school, and Opa came to talk to my class. I will never forget watching him tell his story. You could hear a pin drop as he spoke about how he left Germany on the kinder transport when he was the same age as each of us students sitting in that room. When it came to education, Opa and I also shared a very special connection. We were both lawyers. From the moment I started law school, Opa wanted to know everything about what I was studying and told me stories about when he was a lawyer and then a judge. I was in awe of him. As I studied for the bar, I remember thinking, I am only taking the New York bar. Opa took and passed the bar exam in New York, West Virginia, Florida, and Ohio. Having him watch me graduate from law school was incredibly special. But what was even more special was that I was sworn into the New York bar in the exact same courtroom that Opa was sworn into several decades before. Once I started working as a lawyer, Opa told me he wanted to be my sponsor for when I was sworn into the Supreme Court. Opa, I know you will be with me when that day comes. Thank you for the lessons you have taught us. I promise to instill the importance of faith, family, and education in my children. I love you.
Hearing these words, the first words that come to my mind, of course, are Ledor Vador Nagid Godlecha. Generation after generation, we tell the praise of the Holy One. It's through our loved ones, through our ancestors, through our matriarchs and patriarchs, that we learn to tell this praise. Every time you gather together as a family, every time you tell a story, you look at a picture, whether that picture was on a beach or elsewhere, Walter, Dad, Opa, take steps through your steps. We say, Ti nishmatot tzura b'tzora chaim. In doing that, his soul will forever be bound in the sacred bond of life. In recognition of that, and the hopes that his soul will continue to ascend to places beyond our imagination, it's my honor to invite Walter's son-in-law, Rabbi Jerry Ginsburg, to recite the El Malei Rachamim. I invite us all to rise.
El Malei Rachamim Shochen B'hamromim Hametzeh Menucha Nechona Tacha Kanfei HaShechina B'malot Kedoshim U'Tehorim Kezoar Harakia Mazhirim Et Nishmat Yehuda Menachem Ben Eliezer Ufredel Shehalach Liolamo Began Eden Tehe Menuchato Ana Baharachamim Hastirehu Besetir Knefecha Leolamim O Tzror Betzror HaChayim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato V'yanuch B'Shalom Al Mishkavo V'Nomar Amen. El Malei Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Walter Reinhold Wertheim, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
You may be seated. Eloheinu ve'Elokei Avoteinu, our God and God of our ancestors, 1,000 years in your sight are as a passing day, an hour of the night. The generations come and go while you endure forever. We are always in your hand, in death as in life. Help we who mourn the loss of Walter Wertheim to look beyond this moment, to realize that death cannot destroy the bonds of everlasting love. Sustain us with the knowledge afforded by faith that you will not allow us to suffer oblivion. For you, Eternal One, have taught us the way of life. Through you we gain eternity. And we say, Amen. The interment will follow at Zion Memorial Park. The family will receive friends, the Shiva home of Steve and Rena Wertheim, 4355 Baintree Road in University Heights. On Saturday evening, Motzei Shabbat from 6 to 8 p.m. with tefillot, with minyan at 7 p.m., from Sunday to 2 to 4 p.m., and then 6 to 8 p.m., and Monday 2 to 4 p.m. and 6 to 8 p.m., minyan at 7 p.m. each of those nights. Contributions are suggested to the Wertheim Family Holocaust Education Fund, care of Congregation Sharei Tikva in Beechwood. Invite us all to rise and invite Walter's grandchildren, our pallbearers, to come forward.